When I was a school chaplain, I mostly taught typical religious curricula in the high school, Bible, world religions, and such. But every winter, third quarter on the calendar, I spent a few months with the sixth graders, co-teaching a kind of a catch-all life skills class with a middle school counselor, and thanks be to God for middle school counselors. We covered a lot of topics pretty quickly in that quarter: study habits, friendship issues, and every year we spent one full week teaching tone of voice. You might not initially think that tone of voice is a life skill. And while these were classrooms full of girls, be assured we were not teaching them to tone their voices down, nor work on their vocal fry. Rather, we were hoping to teach them the essential difference between saying, "Where have you been?" and "Where have you been?" What's going on with you? What's going on with you? It actually is a life skill, the cultivation of curiosity instead of judgment. Now, sometimes judgment is warranted, though not nearly as often as some teenagers think. Even when discernment leads to approving or disapproving of someone's choices, the tone of voice with which we offer that judgment still matters. I was on the receiving end of lessons like this, lessons about tone of voice, when I was in seminary. We were put through our paces in a week-long class officially called Oral Interpretation of Scripture, which was to teach us how to read Scripture out loud in worship settings. Fancy names, comes with the church. A very ornery retired minister taught this class. You need to know that. And you may or may not be surprised to learn that the class came to be known as Read and Bleed. This man never hesitated to stop you mid-syllable and correct and critique your pronunciation and your tone of voice. His favorite text to have us practice with was from the 3rd chapter of Paul's letter to the Galatians. "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" There's some judgment there, y'all. So with all that as background, I was caught up some years ago listening to Fred Craddock, no relation to our Craddock family, preach on this very particular parable about the man with his barns. Fred Craddock was a brilliant biblical scholar and a preacher, and this is important, he was from rural Tennessee. He lived in a small Appalachian town when he wasn't on faculty at Emory University. As such, you might imagine that his voice and accent were quite distinctive, and you'd be right. It's worth finding a YouTube, y'all. It's just a great voice. As he retold the story about the rich man and the silos and the grain, you also knew he knew from farming. But then, when he got to the part where God interrupts the man with his building plan, Fred Craddock almost whispered, ever so gently, "Get it straight. Before the voice comes to your house and says, 'You fool, tonight. Judgment, yet so gently delivered, it felt like an invitation. There is judgment in this story, no way around it. Jesus has something to say to us about accumulation and hoarding. But Jesus has also just disclaimed his role as judge and arbiter of family estates. And Jesus wants us to keep listening. And so he makes his own decision to deliver the message about greed as a story, not as a finger wag, his own way of modulating his voice. Again, among Jesus' stories, this one is not ambiguous. No one needs to sidle up afterwards to ask him what it means. It's pretty clear. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich toward God. Notice, though, that while the man is wealthy, he's not a villain. He has not mistreated any tenants in this story, nor won his riches by cheating or by graft. The land produced, and he benefited. He's not malicious, but he is foolish. And we see this even before the telltale word is used. Did you notice how he talks to himself? What should I do? And then, in accordance with the old punchline, it's no harm talking to yourself, but be careful answering, he answers, I know, I'll pull these barns down and build larger ones. But the conversation isn't over. He keeps going, chatting with his own soul. Soul, you have everything you need. And finally, he famously advises himself to eat, drink, and be merry. Our main character has strong main character energy, as the kids say. He believes himself to be the only player in the story, and that his own voice is the only one worth listening to. And this is foolish. He doesn't look around at all at his fields and neighbors. If he did, he would certainly see the constant need, and perhaps recall that one way to deal with abundance is to share. There is, after all, a biblical command to intentionally leave some grain behind for gleaning by widows and orphans. And he consults no one but his own voice, holding an entire conversation in his own head, no asking for advice or wondering about how his riches might benefit the community. And no prayer, no consideration, no curiosity about how God might view this situation. Again, he's not presented as evil, just very nearsighted and irresponsible, in the sense that he has forgotten that he is responsible for his neighbors and to God. What he has is the desire to pile it all up for the sake of piling it all up. But then, get it straight. Before the voice comes to your house and says, you fool, tonight. Judgment, but delivered to this foolish man as an invitation to consider the brevity of his life and the pointless project of accumulation. Y'all, it's an interesting time to read this story about bigger barns. Today, when we celebrate 193 years of this building, in this season, when we continue to celebrate the fruits of a building campaign, it's right, I think, to feel the twinge of recognition in this story, whether here at Calvary or in our own homes. When we look around at all that we have, and when all of us, no matter the size of our accounts, move through a world which tells us that our lives do consist in the abundance of possessions. Isn't that so often the message? Buy more, upgrade, get the newest edition. The tone of judgment is there, and there's not a lot of working around it. The story is not unclear. Get it straight. Before the voice comes to your house and says, you fool, tonight. Jesus is clear, not this time about malice, but about foolishness. Did you think that all this stuff would make you happy? Do you still believe that bigger barns will fill that hole? Almost 200 years ago, some people on the banks of the Mississippi River thought it would be a good idea to build a church. And the story is that from a group of about a dozen folks, they envisioned and designed a building that would seat almost 600. Now, keep in mind that this was for a city of 1,700 total. I'll give you a minute to do that math. This was optimism bordering on absurdity. Surely some of them looked upon their efforts as foolish. If I can look back on them with curiosity, though, I see an intention not to amass treasure, but to share their abundance, visible here today. This place wasn't built for hoarding, it was built for generosity. Surely we've hit that mark and missed that mark over the years. In our most recent work, we've made this place wider, brighter, more accessible, so that we are more ready to share communion and aid and hope and love. The walls and hallways themselves have shifted their tone from good luck finding your way through here to we're so glad that you're here. And we all continue then to reshape our hearts to align with this more generous spirit. And this is a lesson we can learn here from this story and from this place in which we hear it. This is a lesson we can carry from this church out into our lives. What should I do with all that I have? What will you do with your crops, or with your money, or with your talent, with your courage, with your wisdom, with your time? There are decisions to be made, and this is actually the essence of judgment. An invitation to decide, to discern, to make choices about the size of our barns, which is to say, the size of our lives. This is the gentle or not so gentle judgment of Jesus. What good is all this stuff piled up in your rented storage unit? Are you still talking to yourself, addressing your own soul rather than listening to the need of your neighbors and the voice of God? Why is it always bigger barns and not bigger tables? However we hear these stories, however harsh or soft the tone of voice is from this gospel parable, the questions hang in the air. The invitation wants your answer and mine, waiting for us to decide, to judge. In our foolishness, we keep thinking the answer is to store up ample goods for ourselves, when the abundance is always intended to be shared. So get it straight before the voice comes to your house and says, "Oh, you fool, tonight